Once a month, when the moon reaches its highest point in the sky and the wild creatures call out to the night, he emerges from a private sanctuary in an undisclosed location outside of Little Rock, Arkansas. Arrayed in his priestly vestments, carrying forth the good news that comic books and graphic novels aren't just for kids, that they aren't just mass and spandex superheroes, that storytelling in a graphic format can be so much more. He is the Graphic Novel Apostle.
Hello and welcome back to the Graphic Novel Apostle podcast. My name is Mark Ohrenberger. I'm your host. I am happy to be back with you for another full episode of our podcast, especially after being away last week when we would usually have a mini episode. So thank you guys for coming back. And I am so happy that today we finally get the man behind the microphone, who has been on the side of the microphone, I suppose, through many of our early episodes, Mr. Travelle McManus. Travelle, how are you?
I'm great. I'm so glad to be here. It's so crazy. You know, we talked about this months ago, this vision of what we can create here, and then the possibility of me one day coming here. So it's like full circle now. Here we are. I'm here, and it's awesome. It's a great feeling.
Man, this makes me so happy. When I first approached you about thinking about this podcast, I'd been thinking about the idea of the podcast and how I wanted to do it for easily a year. And I think I was a little intimidated by the idea of what microphones am I going to need? What do I need to do for these, voice processors and editing? And I don't know. I know it's all available on YouTube. You can learn how to do it and everybody's got 100 different opinions too. But I was like, I know somebody who's an expert in this kind of thing. And I was so happy to finally catch you one Sunday at church and just say, Travelle, let's talk. You were really good about it too. We went out, your family and mine, to Buffalo Wild Wings one night, on a school night no less. And we sat down after our families left, after we had dinner, and you and I just stayed there. And man, we could have closed that place down that night.
Oh, absolutely.
I was having so much fun talking to you about what I wanted to do. And I was excited about how receptive you were to that as well. When I approached you with the idea of, basically consulting on starting a podcast, any idea it would be something weird like this? Or what was your first reaction?
No, I loved, because I have been in the podcast space for about 2 years now with my job, and it was something that I've always loved. I'm a big podcaster. I barely listen to music now. It's all podcasts. And I knew that was something that's easy to do, easy to set up. And it was like, I don't get why a lot of people, including myself, why more people are not doing this, because it's so simple. It's so easy, more easy than, YouTubing or anything else. And so when you came to me, it just made sense. It was like, finally, somebody who gets it, someone who gets that this is an easy medium to connect with people, to share your passions. And I've been trying to find something like that. So for you coming with a thought out plan, a goal, a vision, it was inspiration for me, because I had the technical skills, but I just couldn't figure out what I could do with that. And you already had that. So I think we were just feeding off each other's energy of excitement of, me being able to put my technical skills to use, and you having a vision and being able to now execute on that because you know what tools to get. So it was just really fun. Like you said, we could have closed that place down. We were just having so much fun. And so that's why this moment just feels special and really cool that we're here.
Yeah, for sure. Although I would appreciate it if you wouldn't tell people this is easy. This is listeners out there.
I take that back. It's really hard. It's a lot of work.
Thank you.
A lot of work,
especially comic book podcasts.
Oh, that's the hardest one. You just can't beat that.
So enjoy what you have here with the Graphic Novel Apostle. Don't start your own, and we'll be good to go. So first of all, this is just my personality. If I'm asking somebody to, get involved with something with me, and whether I'm asking them to jump on board and get into what I'm doing, or whether I'm asking them to come help me with something or whatever, I really need reassurance that person is into it. I just do, And so I felt so good when I left Buffalo Wild Wings that night, knowing that I was like, yeah, Travelle really, really likes this. We're going to have a lot of fun together. But what was even better was 2 hours later, I get an email from you or a text saying, here's a Google Doc I put together with all the equipment you'll need, and here's a direct link to get it from Amazon. And I thought, wow, okay. This was no show. He was ready to go. So that's awesome. The book that I picked to ask you to read it spins out directly from one of the things we talked about that night, because I was asking you if you'd had any background with comic book reading or anything like that, or what superheroes or properties that we see in cartoons and movies you were into. And one of the things you talked about was Mighty Morphin Power Rangers.
Yes, absolutely.
So, we've joked in the first 2 episodes about an age difference between us. I'm 43. You're still 29, aren't you?
Yes, I'll be 30 in a few months.
So, all right, we still...
Almost there.
But that difference was enough that, I was a kid who was just a little too old for Power Rangers. I could see myself having gotten into it had I been 2 years younger.
Yeah.
And so I knew it was a thing. I knew that it moved on from the original Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Yes. I did not realize it is I guess it's still going.
I think so. I don't follow it as much as I used to. I think I was behind the scenes following it all the way up until I graduated high school. But yeah, I think I was the perfect age because it was already established. I mean, they've already taken all the toy stores you could think of with their action figures and their robots. And so, yeah, it was the perfect storm for me growing up. And I think there's still to this day, there's an anime I'm actually watching right now that's kind of a throwback to Power Rangers in a way with a completely different spin that's been really interesting to watch. But yeah, no, it's something that was just very captivating at that, in my upbringing.
What generation of Power Rangers was that you got on board with?
I think it was Mighty Morphin, because I'm thinking of, I think Mighty Morphin was probably the first one. There was a Beetle one, because there's so many, and they kind of blend together as I've gotten older and I've been more removed from them. Because I think there was one that was Beetle related, they had Beetle powers, and it was really interesting. And there was only 3 Power Rangers. Usually it was 5, so I think they were changing it up with their format on how many Power Rangers they had, and then from there there was always a new season, and it was always exciting because there's gonna be a new costume, new monsters, new heroes to fall in love with. And so it was so really just all across the board, all the Power Rangers. But I think Mighty Morphin was probably the most iconic one. It's the one that really, if you were kind of a fan after Mighty Morphin, you were pretty much a hardcore fan because of what it represented.
Cool. Well, when Garrett was smaller, probably 4 or 5 years old, found a bunch of those series on Netflix, and he got into Power Rangers Ninja Steel. And I was in my late 30s at this point, and I was into Power Rangers Ninja Steel too. That one was really fun. That one had like a game show set up almost.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. My brother was into that because that one was I think that was near my end of Power Rangers. I got into it was middle school. Had to start watching more mature shows, but my brother picked up my Power Ranger habits, and he was kind of keeping me up to date with it, and he watched that one. He loved it.
You had a Power Rangers correspondent.
Yes,
I love
that.
That's good. So the reason I spend all this time talking about Power Rangers is I told you that night that they make Power Rangers comics. They still to
and
this
I did not
day.
know that. As someone who was a hardcore Power Rangers fan, I did not know that they made comic books around Power Rangers.
Yeah, and I think they sell pretty well. You always see them on the store shelves. And we talk about all of this to lead me up to, I think originally when you first said you'd be willing to be a guest on the show, I'd said, okay, well, we'll find one of those Power Rangers volumes that would be a good one to do. Although I'd never really read any of the comics. For a while, Garrett was collecting them, but he would never let me read them to him. So it was like, well, now I'm just buying you comic books that you put in a box, So we got away from that. But I'd been familiar with this series that we're going to read today called Radiant Black. It started coming out in issues in 2021 within the time when I had been already into comics. Mm-hmm. And when I heard about the idea of this is going to be some kind of new superhero universe, but it's not Marvel or DC, I thought, well, that's interesting, but I get plenty of superheroes from Marvel and DC.
Yes.
And I really, in the independent comics, all those other, the mysteries, the crime, the, war stories, whatever. So I had passed over this up to this point, and I had always heard that it's really good. And I thought, well, eventually I'll get around to it. And in fact, the trade paperback copy you've got of Radiant Black Volume 1, I came across a good sale one day, and I bought that, I guess 3 years ago almost. Oh, okay. And so it's been sitting on my shelf, but I had not read it until we got ready to do this. This draws a lot of comparisons to Power Rangers.
Yes.
And I wanted to, at least for these early days of the podcast, stick with not only not Marvel and DC superheroes, no offense to them, we'll talk about them lots, I'm sure, eventually, but also not as many of the licensed properties like Power Rangers or Flintstones or whatever that they make comics out of. And eventually we will get around to all those types of books too. But I was like, well, this will be a good excuse for me to read Radiant Black, and we'll do a Power Rangers type thing.
No, and I appreciate that, because I think that was another big thing, kind of going back to our conversation when we first talked about this. Like, I guess I was thinking of how to explain this on the way here, and I think I came to, in Star Wars terms, you would be, the Jedi Master when it comes to comic book novels and things like that, and you've been bringing in Padawans, and I would like to think of myself as like a Jedi Knight. I'm not fully there, but the thing was, all of my comic book assumptions, like when we talked about like how much experience I had with graphic novels and things like that, it was the mainstream, the Marvel, the DC. Like, you really, especially through the podcast, have opened my eyes to how bigger it is than just these billion-dollar properties that we're all familiar with. Like, I've read all the Spider-Man comics you could think of. I've read a lot of Black Panther comics and all of I didn't know about Power Rangers, but it made sense. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, that was another big one for me. So I read all of these popular popular quotations, like just very, mainstream comics. So it really has been cool to see that there's just so much more out there than just, the Marvels and the DCs of the world.
Yeah, for sure. I've been having fun sort of showing people that. And I've been pleased with the responses, too, that people have given me. And I continue to be so happy that I get people who give me this kind of feedback. Like, yeah, I read that book that you guys did, or I stopped the podcast and I found a copy of the book, and then I finished listening to the podcast after I read it. Or our buddy Ben Thomas.
Yeah.
After we did that Criminal episode, he has read maybe all 7 volumes of Criminal so far.
Really?
Yes, he jumped on board with that one.
I love that.
Yeah, it made me real happy. Real happy when he and I got to talking about that some. So let's jump into this now.
Yeah.
Radiant Black is part of a bigger superhero universe, or shared superhero universe, called the Massive Verse. So, just like you've got the DC universe and the Marvel universe. It's funny. I told you that Radiant Black drew all these comparisons to Power Rangers, but through much of the first volume that we read here, which was the introduction to anything in this Massive Verse, it didn't feel like that.
No.
At all. I was like, maybe I led Travelle astray, or maybe what I've been hearing about this is wrong. I mean, the costumes look similar.
Yes, the costume, the color of the costumes, the different characters, but no, it definitely takes a different approach to it that I found just really interesting.
Well, and I think even where we're going to leave off at the end of Volume 1, we're only getting the first hints of how that's going to work and how they'll form as a team or not form as a team. And truthfully, I don't know how the flow of the Massive Verse goes beyond this. So just to give you an idea, this first title, Radiant Black, is what kicked off the Massive Verse. Today we're going to be talking about Radiant Black Volume 1, which is called The Not-So-Secret Origin. And it's written by Kyle Higgins. Kyle Higgins significantly was also a writer of Power Rangers comics for Boom Studios. Yeah. Boom Studios is the one who has the license to do those over the last several years. And so he wrote a bunch over there. And then artist Marcelo Costa. Later in this volume, so this volume includes the first 6 issues of Radiant Black. So on the 5th issue, we have a guest artist, Eduardo Ferigato. And then on the 6th issue, which we'll talk about when we get to, but is quite different from the first 5. You'll see why when we talk about the story, too, that it's really starting to branch off into this Massive Verse. But that one is credited as being co-written by a writer named Cherish Chen, and there was a guest artist on that issue as well, Darko Lafuente. That 6th issue looks totally different.
Yes.
The 5th issue, I'm not sure that I would have picked up that it was a different artist, and maybe it was just parts of it were the different artist. I'm not entirely sure, but I wouldn't have noticed the difference there. But after this first volume of Radiant Black, I think that was when they started to introduce some of the other titles that would come along in this series. So in addition to Radiant Black, there was a Radiant Red. There's been a Radiant Pink series. And then we've had a few others that didn't follow the Radiant name within this massive verse. Rogue Sun, The Dead Lucky, and Inferno Girl Red. And then No/1, which has just been coming out fairly recently. But a lot of these are written by different writers, and I just think that's a really cool thing to see, that there are a lot of people who are getting their mouths fed, off of this totally outside of Marvel or DC universe that now exists on its own at Image Comics.
Yes.
Very, very fun to see. Well, let's get into it and talk about it. First of all, what did you think overall?
I really enjoyed it. I mean, kind of like what we've been talking about. Like, I'm very familiar with comic books, with graphic novels, so this wasn't uncomfortable territories for me. Like, I know some previous conversations, you had people saying, I've never read these before, or I've read very little. But for me, this was very common territory for me. I am more familiar with manga. That was something we've also talked about before. And so there was kind of a shift. I had to learn how to read, like, how we normally read a book, because I read the opposite way when reading manga, which just throws me off.
Hey, tell our listeners about that, because that's not something I knew until probably 2 years ago.
Yeah, so I don't know what the read. I guess that's just how they read comics in Japan, but manga you read from right to left, and so like the book, you get the book and it is like completely backwards, and so you are and it just takes time to kind of practice how to follow along, because you're reading like the right page from right to left, then you're reading the left page from right to left, which is just completely opposite in every way that we go about. The only thing that's the same is you're going from top down, but even that can get complicated because the panels get very crazy at times, especially during like fight scenes and things like that. And so I've been so used to, because I've been reading manga for way more than half my life, since I was like 11, and so reading a graphic novel with that panel layout in the there's no right, but in the direction that we normally would do in America, it was like, it's funny that I was telling my wife as I was reading this, like, it's funny that I'm reading this, like I'm having a hard time reading this when I shouldn't be.
You want the story backwards.
And she made jokes about, because she's bought me a whole bunch of manga books, a lot of manga sets, and she would look at it and be like, I'm so like, why is this backwards? And it's like, no, this is right. And so, but yeah, no, it was a great read. I'm very interested, like, because it didn't end on a cliffhanger, but it left you with more questions than answers, and I found that really interesting, and definitely just like something to capture my attention, to want to read the next few series, to learn more about what this power is, what about the characters, the things that kind of happen, because there was something that happened that we can, once we get to that point, we'll talk about, that I found really interesting, because it's not common to see when you shift the focus of who the main character is,
sure,
and things like that. So yeah, it was a great read.
So quick question for you: you told me one time that you have a full set of, is it Demon Slayer?
Yes.
So you've got this full set of Demon Slayer, and I saw a picture that your wife had taken one day within your house, and I saw this bookshelf.
Yep.
And it looked gorgeous on the bookshelf, because it's a big set. But tell me this, do you line the books up volume 1, volume 2, left to right, or do you do it right to left?
Oh, it is from left to right. Yes, left to right.
Okay, so the way we would expect
yes,
to find
the way we would expect it, yes.
It was at Christmas time, I think this was 2 years ago. Garrett was getting really into Pokemon. And so I was like, oh, I'll pick up a Pokemon manga. I think he'll get into that. Maybe he'll let me read it to him. He's prickly like that. And I went to the comic shop, because they have an area where they sell manga there at the comic shop I go to. And I picked up this Pokemon book, and I was looking at it, and I was like, the cover's on upside down. or it's on the back, or it's backwards. And then stupid me, hanging out in a comic book store, I start thinking to myself, maybe this is valuable because it's a misprint, because the cover's on the back. And so it got me to Googling, like, is manga like this? And the other thing is that you have these really beautiful colored covers.
Yes.
But manga is almost always in black and white.
Yes, and that's another thing too. And I think this was great, because the illustration in this book is amazing. I think it was really well done.
So good. Yeah.
I'm a big fan of neon light, so like the neon vibe to it was really pretty. But yes, no, that's another thing too, is you don't have to work as hard when reading this, and that was enjoyable because you kind of got more illustration to work with, because you would, for years be reading this manga, and then you finally get like the anime adaptation. You're like, oh, that's the color of their clothes, like that's the color of their, and you'll get, since there is a full color print, you usually get a general idea of like visual details of color and things like that. But when something new happens, or like a new move or something visually happening, it's in black and white. You don't know if that lightning bolt is yellow, blue, or white. It's just there. And sometimes if it's very important, there will be a side notation outside of the panel giving you colors or details. But most times, that's only if it's like 100% key to the story. But if it's just a simple move or a simple illustration, you just don't know what color it is.
That's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Especially when you think about, I mean, I understand that people of all ages read manga. Manga or manga?
Either or.
Okay.
I've heard people say both.
Okay. So, people of all ages read it, but I know a lot of kids read manga.
Yes.
And I would have just guessed that it would be harder, especially for kids, to get into black and white art like that. Do you have any thoughts about? I know also they adapt a lot of those, like you said, into animation, and so the anime will be in color. And maybe it's that you see it in color and you get familiar with the stories and the characters, and then you accept it when it's black and white. What do you think?
Oftentimes, and I think when I was younger, oftentimes the anime would lead you to the manga, so you would already have a visual understanding of what the colors will look like based on the show before you even read the book. Like, I think of Naruto, which is a very popular one. Like, most people saw Naruto on a Tuesday night, and now they're reading the manga, so they already have a understanding of Naruto's in an orange jumpsuit, and like what these characters' colors look like, and what all that kind of entails. And so it is the more mature manga reader that would be willing to, like, I've just gotten to the point where now I'm actually reading manga that doesn't have an anime adaptation to it right now. Usually what would happen is I would watch a show, fall in love with the show, but know I'm going to have to wait a year before I can get more information, but the story is already kind of out there. So then I would go to the manga. So that kind of helps with that point.
Okay. Do you know whether there's a usual pattern, whether the manga comes first or the anime?
The manga always comes first. Usually the manga and the anime are about a year or 2 years apart.
Okay.
And so like there's one anime I'm watching, Jujutsu Kaisen, the manga, for where the manga's at right now, that won't be animated until like 2026, 2027.
Wow. Okay.
So, and that's also why there's a gap with the anime when they're being released, because they're letting the manga catch up so they can have enough material to work with.
Makes sense. Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Cool. Well, what do you say we talk about Radiant Black?
Let's do it.
How do you generally feel about superhero origin stories?
It's tricky because we're in this stage. I overall like them. I do struggle with the timing of when they get their powers, how long of a gap that is. We are in an interesting period where, like, a lot of movies and a lot of shows that are showing origin stories to superheroes that we're familiar with, they usually kind of just jump in now because we've known the story of Spider-Man and all these others. And so I have actually found myself enjoying that more. Like, I like it when they already have the power.
Same.
And you're more so looking at the gaps between when, like, where they're at now and how they got that while they're moving on to their next challenge. Kind of the third Spider-Man, like that whole approach. And so, like, Black Panther, I love that he was introduced. He was already in the suit. And so there are, but with something like this was such a unique concept because it's something completely new. It's not leaning on the backs of anything that we've known before. So I feel like this was a proper setup. Yeah. Because it was also pretty quick too. It wasn't like you were 5-6 days in trying to figure out where this was going. It was about 24 hours in. You were like, okay, we're in for a ride.
Yeah, true. So we hear about this idea of like superhero fatigue with the movies.
Yes.
I don't experience that.
No.
at all. Give me more. I know some of the Marvel movies haven't been as good after Endgame. I get it. There have been some that have been underrated after Endgame too. Show me Shang-Chi 200 times in a row.
So
Holy
good.
cow. And the Black Widow movie. But anyway, to move on from that, I experienced, though, a little bit of origin story fatigue.
Yeah.
You know, I hadn't really thought about it until you said it just now, but like I was not that familiar with Black Panther until that movie came out. And the origin story is given in there. It's not how the movie starts.
Yes.
But you get the idea of all the background where it came from. So I hadn't thought of it that way. I can't see Batman's origin story again, you know?
Yeah.
This, you know, you see not so secret origin, and I thought, I'm not sure if I'm going to get into this.
Yeah.
I did instantly. And made me so happy. And you're right. They don't dwell on it real long. And in some ways, the whole volume is also kind of the origin story. Because by the end of Volume 1, I mean, we still don't know what the deal is with this global threat. We don't even know the name of the archvillain, which is wild. So we begin very first page with just a picture of a phone showing a guy's like online banking, and he's looking at it, and he's about $38,000 in the hole. And we catch him on the phone. You know, he's sitting in his car and he's talking on the phone to a bank where he's trying to get a loan, and they're, you know, he's trying to smooth talk as best he can. He's not getting anywhere. You know, he gets off the phone and basically breaks down and starts to cry, sitting in the driver's seat of his car when he realizes, you know, he's this huge amount of money in debt. He's not getting anywhere, and he just doesn't know what to do with himself. And it's, you know, kind of funny. He's having this terrible moment by himself where he's just, you know, crumpling, and all of a sudden this guy opens the back door of the car and says, hey, sorry, I'm sorry to keep you waiting. And then he looks in, he sees this guy crying. He's like, oh, I'll get another. And he says, no, just get in. Because we realize this guy's basically doing like Uber driving.
Yes.
And he's doing what he can to make ends meet. So we learn pretty quickly here. This guy's name is Nathan Burnett, and he is out in Los Angeles, California, where he has moved to try and become a writer. It was his life's ambition. He's been out there for a couple of years, tried his hand. Apparently, he's had some writing block for a real long time, and now he's so deep in debt that he realizes, I can't keep pursuing this the way I have. And so our story opens with kind of a down place in this guy's life. Nathan is going to have to go back home to Lockport, Illinois, which I understand to be just outside of Chicago.
Yes.
So we meet this guy, really, other than just seeing that little opening scene where he's realizing his life in Los Angeles is not going to be anymore. We meet him going back home to his parents, who are greeting him in the driveway, and he's walking in, and his mom, who turns out to be his biggest cheerleader.
Yes.
Mom is just, you know, hugging on him and so happy to see him, and his dad is welcoming, but you can tell already he's a little bit stern too. But over the course of this issue, and about the time his parents are greeting him and welcoming him home, this guy walks up, and he's going to be our other main character throughout this first volume. And his name is Marshall Ward, and we learn he's like an old high school friend of Nathan. And our story picks up pretty quickly from there. You know, first night home, Nathan is going to take Marshall out. You know, they'll talk and they'll catch up and they'll have a good time. And you can tell, I'll tell you what, Nathan is a sweet guy. Marshall is somebody who is going to, he's going to give you a hard time.
Yes. Keep it real with you.
He's going to keep it real with you.
Everything's a joke.
That's it, right? Everything is going to be sarcasm. Everything is going to be like, he's not going to be a shoulder to cry on about how bad in debt this guy is.
No. Which is so sad for Nathan, because it's like he's really trying to have a moment here of like, this is where I'm at in life, and Marshall's just cracking all of these jokes of like, you're just failing. Like, come on now. Like, how did you get to this point of being in $38,000 in debt?
Right. You know, and you would expect this would be the time when your friend leans over and pats your back and tells you everything is going to be okay, and he's just like, dude, you're toast, man. Oh man. But anyway, they end up having this big night. And I guess something that's kind of funny about this scene where they're sitting in the bar, Marshall is in his own way trying to put a nice coat of paint on his friend having to come home, talking about how much fun they're going to have together, and saying, this town is not like you remember back in high school. It's really a cool place. And then we see them walking out of the bar after Marshall has had a bunch of drinks, and he's like, this place is the worst. We got to get out of here.
Yeah, and I think the one thing I found really interesting with Marshall, and it kind of put things in perspective of just figuring out that Marshall also must be pretty lonely. I'm just thinking of like going home and just having a friend just come up and be like, drinks tonight. Like, this is what we're doing. Like, you can see that like there's a loneliness that they're both kind of experiencing in different ways. You know,
Sure.
Nathan's reflecting on his career, but Marshall is like, he is out trying to have a good time with a friend that just came out of nowhere. It's like he seems to be someone that was looking for someone that like kind of gravitate to. Everyone loved this. He's the guy who stayed in the small town. You know, he's the guy who never left. And so I can imagine that coming with his own fair share of loneliness as well.
That's a good point. And he doesn't seem to have a whole lot going on. He works in a video store.
Yeah.
And I mean, back when video stores still existed, which is kind of funny because this is basically set in modern day.
Yes.
But he works in a video store, and it seems like he entertains himself by coming up with like the goofiest promotions and specials and stuff that he can for video rental. What is the one? Lotion in the Lamb, where you can get some hand lotion and rent Silence of the Lambs.
Just like weird stuff. Yeah.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. This may be like the biggest ray of sunshine in Marshall's life is his old friend coming back to town. It's like, I got someone to hang out with now. So they're leaving this bar, and Marshall is drunk, and they're kind of stumbling on down the street. Really pretty in the art here. You have one of those like red night skies, and they look up, and they're just standing here on the side of the road, and I guess they're over by some like railroad tracks that run through town. And they look up and they see this thing. And in the first panel, it sort of looks like Saturn to me. It's like there's a black sphere in the sky that's radiating. Forgive me for using the word, but it's radiating this like blue light around it and has a ring around it like Saturn. And, they're puzzling, like, what is this? And it's coming down closer and closer. Based on the little bit we know about these two characters at this point, I would sort of expect Marshall to be the one who's going to like run out and try and jump at it.
Yes.
But instead, as this thing floats down right to them, Nathan reaches out his hand. This thing just comes to him, and they can't figure out, what on earth it is. But he gets hold of it, and, I mean, what do we see?
This really just cool, kind of a full spread. Is it full? Was that what it's called?
Oh, a double page spread.
Double page spread for me, of him transforming into this really just awesome, like, spacesuit is like, probably the best way I could describe it. Like, it looks like something that you would see out of space and high tech, and the way that it kind of just fits, it looks like it's like, I don't know, like electricity is kind of, some kind of energy is building the costume around him. So it's not like a Power Rangers where they kind of put on a costume. This is something where this suit is being made for him, and it looks really, really cool.
That's right. It's a really cool, sleek looking outfit, and the transformation is just beautifully done in the art. And that energy, I mean, it almost looks like lightning that's coming off of him. Very cool looking. You think about like the Spider-Man symbiote suit, the way it sort of wraps around the body. I mean, that's sort of how this kind of takes over him. We talk about Power Rangers here. This also reminds me a little bit of the Blue Beetle.
Yes.
Did you watch that movie?
Yes, I did watch that movie. Really good.
Oh man, it was so cool. But the idea with the character, the Blue Beetle, is you've got these like scarabs from outer space that are aliens, and they, latch on to the body of a human host and form the costume, right around them.
Have a mind of his own.
Yeah. And yeah, that's right. They communicate with each other, the host and the scarab. This plays out very similarly, really, because you see this. They refer to it several times as looking like kind of like a black hole.
Yeah.
This sphere is the logo on his chest, on his costume. We'll see here coming up. It sort of engages in this dialogue with Nathan, who is slowly becoming its host. While these guys are standing here, they're trying to just figure out what on earth just happened. Why is Nathan suddenly in this suit? As that happens, these two police officers come along. I don't know whether Marshall is just a antagonist at all times, or whether he would be, or whether he's more so because he's a little drunk here. But, these guys are standing on the tracks, and these police officers just walk up, and they're like, what are you guys doing? Why are you standing on the railroad tracks? And Marshall starts on this whole, it's a freedom of assembly. Yeah. We got the right to be here. Get out of here.
How confrontational can I be in this moment? And that's what he accomplished.
Maximum confrontation. That's right. And meanwhile, all three of the people standing here, the two police officers and Nathan, are trying to tell Marshall, get off the tracks. Yeah. And, and he's like, no, I'm going to stand here. It's my right. There's a train coming. And we see the first manifestation of the radiant black powers from Nathan in this moment, because the only way to save Marshall, basically, is all of a sudden the police car, the train that's coming down the track, the two police officers all just lift up into the air.
Yeah, you see this blue aura around everyone that's being lifted up. So you can see, and then you see that also on his suit. So you see that there is a connection here. His suit is, I guess, a telepathic field that's being built here to carry all of these tons of items, from a train to the police car to people, all just out of the way.
Yeah. And that double page spread too of the first use of the radiant black powers, it's so pretty.
It is really pretty.
So eventually the officers agree they won't arrest these guys who've been standing around on the tracks as long as the radiant black character will put them down. And so Nathan does, and they go on their way. These guys, one of the police officers says, I don't even know how to write this up.
But who's going to believe this?
A la Superman here, we see Nathan, who's still in full costume, grab onto Marshall by the side, sort of like Lois Lane, and fly off into the sky. And it's like, whoa, a new superhero is born. Yep. Of course, though, these guys don't really know what to make of what has just happened to them. They don't know what this light is that's just hit Nathan. At first, he's trying to figure out how to get the helmet off his head even, and, gets a suggestion from Marshall, just think about the helmet coming off your head, and that's what does it. Mm-hmm. But up till then, old Nathan's, pulling at it, trying to get it off his head. They're trying to decide next, what do we do with these newfound powers? Well, meanwhile, we get a bit of a tonal switch, and we're now in Chicago, and I say a tonal switch, a big color shift in terms of how everything is lighted, and it's moving from blues to oranges. Yeah. And there's an explosion of some point in Chicago. And we see a foot that looks like the shoe from Nathan's costume, except it's got a yellow trail, or a red trail of lightning trailing off behind it. Mm-hmm. And we see someone in an identical costume to Nathan's, except that where Nathan has this white trim along his black costume and around the sphere at the center of the chest, this one is all red.
Yes. Oh, and I was going to say, the irony of it, too, as well, is because there's text still, while we made this shift to another suit, another character, there's still dialogue being made from the previous conversation where Marshall was talking about embracing this uniqueness that Nathan now has. And so Marshall, talking about his uniqueness, kind of was saying well, this is, this makes you one of a kind, while also realizing that's not necessarily true. There's someone else also in this suit. So I just found the irony of that and how they introduced the second, this character, while Marshall was well, you're the only one that has this power. It's nope, that's not how the story goes.
That's right. One page later, and will turn out it's basically at the same time we're seeing this character that same night, although this character already seems to have figured out what it is to have this radiant power.
Yes, and they already have vision on how they want to use it.
That's right, because this character is not saving himself from a train or his friend. This character is not saving a kitten in a tree. This character is walking out of a bank with two giant duffel bags stuffed with cash and has caused a giant explosion. And so we'll have to figure out, maybe in Chapter 2, called Better Off Red, what the deal is with this other radiant figure. So I don't want to dwell on this too much, but one of the, I guess, a leitmotif that we see along the way in this story is the relationship of Nathan and his father.
Yes.
We can tell it's not an easy relationship like with his mother, or at least there's some amount of tension in it. And a lot of it has to do with, his father's expectations for Nathan. Mm-hmm. And, his father is very clear with him, you're welcome to stay here and live in this house, but we're not going to be the writer that doesn't produce anything.
Yes.
You're going to have to get a real job and also write.
Yes. And this actually was a pretty like this I resonated with a lot because like being in the creative space, I remember the conversations I had with my mom when I went to college as a computer science major. You think computer science, you think super successful, you think Google. And then one day I'll wake up and I call my mom and tell her, I want to start working with cameras. And now 2024, that looks like a more reasonable option. But in 2015, when I was having this conversation, it was like the same as being a writer or a teacher. It was very much not known to be a lucrative job. And so we were having these same conversations of how are you going to take care of yourself? And the thought of there being a possibility of coming home and having to have this kind of conversation with my mom would have been a painful one, which is why I was very thankful that I found the right situation, people and businesses to not be in that situation. But it's like, there's very much a reality where that could have been me. And so I can resonate with the failure or the fear of failure that Nathan is having with this idea of wanting to be, right. And we kind of, later on we see what his writing looks like, and it's not bad. It's not like he's a bad writer. It's just, with no vision, no clear path. It's not as straightforward as, Marshall, who just works at a movie store and just tells people to buy movies. And so yeah, it was a really interesting conversation. It was, just kind of taps into Nathan's character a little bit more.
Yeah, and, I warmed up to the dad, too. At first, I was afraid this dad was going to be I'm the stern dad character, and everything you do is wrong. And that's not what it was. Mm-hmm. He's encouraging with a really healthy dose of reality.
Yes, and I feel that way. I never felt that way about his character just because it reminded me so much of my mom. Like, that's how my mom is. So when I saw the angle that was coming from, I did not look at it from like a resentful parent kind of way, more of a, let's just be real. Like, let's get back to reality here. It's okay to dream, but we have to be realistic about our dreams and how we make those happen. And that was like always the approach my mom took with me when I would go off on these crazy dreams of being X or Y. It was always like, okay, how do we make that possible? Mm-hmm. And sometimes I was like, okay, it might take a little bit more work than I'm willing to put in to make that possible.
Well, that's good. You get that good, healthy dose. So Nathan, though, back home, I mean, he's not telling his parents about what's going on with him here. First of all, I would say the experience of having enjoyed these superpowers for a very short period of time has also given him a little bit more, like, confidence, I think. Yep. Because part of when he's talking to his dad is he's saying, you know what, I'm going to make this work. I'll get a job, mm-hmm. I'll do what I have to do, but I'm also going to write, and it's going to happen.
Yes.
And I agree with you. We read a couple of text pages later in this book of a short story that Marshall had written, and I liked it.
Yeah.
I wanted to read more of Marshall's short stories.
But it also shows how much of a focus this is for him, because for him to tap into these new powers and he's still making writing his story, it probably I love videos. I love making videos and doing my job. But if I came across this kind of power overnight, the last thing I'm doing is picking up a camera and film. Unless I'm filming myself doing cool tricks with my powers, I'm not touching the camera. And so it just shows you like this is like he could care less about these powers right now. Like he wants to write his story, and I thought that once again just kind of showed where his mind was at.
Yeah, that's funny. And we know from what we saw with the one panel of the red character, the radiant red character, it's like, this character's got it figured out.
Yes,
we're going straight to the bank. And, I kept saying Marshall writing, and I'm going to keep doing that, I think, mixing the two guys up. I mean, they have different color hair. They don't look the same. Their facial features are different. But I think I'm just going to keep mixing these two friends up.
And for obvious for good reasons once we get kind of further into the story.
Ooh, good point. Right. Part of Nathan immediately going back to thinking about writing also leaves you this question like, oh, so he doesn't just immediately decide I'm going to be a superhero.
Yeah.
In fact, I think maybe he's, I've said he's got more confidence maybe in himself, but it doesn't look like he's super confident that he's going to be Superman.
Yes.
That he's going to be save the world guy. In fact, I mean, those police officers from the night before come to his house, and they're trying to encourage him to say, okay, you have some abilities here. You've got to figure out how you're going to, like, save this community.
Yes.
Which I thought was pretty cool.
That was pretty cool. It was a pretty interesting, like, when you see the police coming, that was, like, not in the top 5 things I thought was going to go down. And so
Right.
I was very happy to hear, like, to see the direction it went, and was kind of surprised. Well, it was kind of how I expected. I thought maybe Marshall would have pushed Nathan harder to actually carry that out, but I could see why he kind of let Nate. I mean, you can kind of see that they were definitely in a disagreement of the stance that Nathan took.
Yeah.
But yeah, there definitely just seems to be a disconnect of what Marshall wants Nathan to do with that power and what Nathan wants to do with that power.
Sure. The whole scene with the police officers is a little unusual, too, because on one hand, they're saying, you have abilities, you can do something great. On the other hand, they're also trying to question him a little bit about this bank robbery.
Yes.
And I think they seem to accept that it's not Nathan because of the red on the costume instead of the white. But at the same time, they're like, well, you two must be in league.
Yeah.
And so they, I guess they don't have any evidence to arrest him or whatever. And so they just kind of vaguely threaten him, we'll be watching you, and then leave. But this is when, Nathan and Marshall are first starting to figure out, like, wait, there's another one? What's this? So going back to Nathan's job as a rideshare service driver, he gets this idea that, like, I'm going to go over to Chicago and I'm going to drive people all day around and just talk to them about this news story of this person that robbed the bank, and maybe find that way.
And I got a really good laugh out of this panel, because you just get like a snapshot of all of his different driving experiences, and it just, like, I've never been my sister was an Uber driver, and she would tell me stories, and all of these kind of highlight. You got someone with a whole bunch of dogs, you got someone that's about to throw up from being sick, you got a couple fighting in the background, you got someone that's just on their phone. So, like, it's just like you're just getting a wide spectrum of people, and then you finally get the one that kind of gives some information that is needed. But it's just a really really funny panel.
It really is, and it's laid out where you've got like 12 panels or 11 panels on this page, so it's a lot of little small drawings. But he uses all these people he talks to sort of piece together bits of information about where he might find this Radiant Red character. And it turns out over by a junkyard of some kind, and they actually have an encounter, and they have a fight. And it's a cool-looking fight. It kind of reminded me of Iron Man fighting Thor.
Yeah.
In, what was that, Iron Man 3? I don't remember which of the...
Iron Man fighting Thor. I think that was the first Avengers.
Oh, is that what it was?
When
they're
fighting
in there,
fighting over Loki.
Oh, okay. And they're in like a public park. Yeah, I just remember they're in this public park with trees. I don't remember. It was one of the earlier movies.
Yeah, in the forest.
But they're having these exchanges where, like, Iron Man punches Thor and he goes through a tree trunk 100 yards away or whatever. And the same thing is kind of happening here, where you have these two super-powered beings. Nathan hadn't really figured out the totality of his powers yet. The Radiant Red character's a little further along. But they're punching each other, and it's like, I'm going to... I punch you in the face and you fly backwards over the next building. And so it's taking up this, like, big, massive area.
Mm-hmm. But it does look like, because it looks like they have two different types of power. Like, Radiant Black, he seems to be able to control things with his mind. He has this, telepathy going on where he can kind of move objects, where it seems like Red is just pure power. And he was doing kind of this weird thing with what looks like a car battery, a car engine. So it seemed like is something going on there with his power and how he gets his energy and how Radiant Black gets his energy. And it seems that Radiant Black, given how the conflict ended, kind of has got the best of Red in a way that you just wouldn't expect, given his battle history and him coming in confrontation with someone who seems to be using their powers a little bit more often than him.
Well, and part of the superhero's journey usually is, I've got some powers, I've got some confidence behind me, I've got to get my tail kicked a couple of times. before I, find something deep inside of me to combine with the powers. That's not what happens. He really does come out on top in this fight. Later on, we'll learn that Radiant Red's powers somehow involve absorbing.
Yes.
And so seeing Radiant Red holding up this like car engine or whatever it is that they're holding up, it's like, oh, so they're maybe absorbing some power out of what remains in that engine. A little unexplained, and I guess that's part of the fun of figuring out what these characters are really all about, because obviously Nathan doesn't understand how this all works either.
And he's like trying to talk. I think he even at one point of the fight was trying to reason with Red and just wondering what's going on, and it's like they just are swinging. So he's like, okay, we're doing this. And they even got to the point where Red stole his car and he had to save his car with his telepath abilities, and I just got a good laugh because it was like, no, like I'm now going to stop you because you tried to ruin my car.
That's right. Hey, this is his source of income.
Yes, I know. Yeah, exactly. Like to him, it's like, this is not just a car. This is literally all I have left. So I'm not playing around with my car. And he gets the best of him.
He does. So he gets the best of Red, and also ultimately, Red takes off, leaves Radiant Black there, kind of panting and trying to recover from this fight, but also with these giant duffel bags of money. Mm-hmm. And the first thought I have, and actually there's this really neat looking page where it shows Radiant Black opening up the duffel bag, and like there are all these banded $100 bills in there, and like scratching his head and thinking, what do I do? And in the last panel on the bottom of the page has like sort of a sad look, and so we don't know. Oh, okay.
Yeah. It feels like, because it's four panel, like it's 5 panels, one with the whole bag of money, and I feel like with each facial expression in these 4 panels, you can kind of see Nathan's thought process without having to have any words. You see the realization of, oh, I just came across a whole bunch of money. Oh, I can be debt free, but is this really who I am? I need to return this money. And you just kind of see like the illustration of this whole book is just amazing. And I think this one is just another way that they do a really good job just in this space costume with very little facial features. Just from the eyes alone, we can kind of tell what Nathan is thinking, and it makes sense when you come to the conclusion that he returns the money. That could have easily probably was definitely more than $38,000
for sure in that bag, and it was all the answers to his problems if he needed it to be. Mm-hmm. But this also tells us something more about Nathan and the person who he is.
Yes,
because so much of superheroes, the first thing people think of is their powers, them flying around, or them smashing or blowing up things or whatever. But so much of what makes the superhero interesting is the person.
Yes.
And maybe I'm stating the obvious with superhero storytelling, but we're seeing that here.
Mm-hmm. And I think it goes into, you were saying like another powerful thing about being a superhero is kind of taking a few beatings. I think another time too is when the hero realizes the magnitude of their powers or what they can accomplish with their powers, and they still choose to use it for good. Because I think Spider-Man is probably the most notorious one for that. The whole great power comes great responsibilities. That stems from this idea of like, with this power, you have so much ability to do harm or to serve yourself, which is what we saw Red doing. That choice in that moment to choose to still do good, I think is what really defines the heroes from the others, whether that's a villain, anti-hero, et cetera, et cetera. So it really was a big, because I didn't really know what Nathan's moral compass was. You knew that he was in having a lot of issues, maybe wasn't the most focused person, but you couldn't tell if you would consider him a morally good or bad person. And I think this was like a defining moment of like, okay, this is someone who actually does have principles and does want to be good, even in a moment where he could have easily solved a lot of his life problems.
Yeah, for sure. With you bringing up the Spider-Man comparison there, and I think it's a good one. I actually started thinking about Spider-Man where you were talking about how much of the emotion on the face could be portrayed through the eyes. You get that with Spider-Man too. But that, how many different superheroes that we know from Marvel and DC have we talked about in the course of this short conversation, maybe not so short conversation. Something cool about creating a brand new character in a brand new universe like this is, you take the best, or the greatest flaws or whatever from all these different characters we know already. And that's been fun to see. So we go into our third chapter, and it's a writing day for Nathan. He's at home, and he's going to be trying to do some writing. And it is kind of funny to think about him, trying to balance driving, his writing, and just figuring out, like, how is my life different now? But we get, and I think this is kind of neat, just stuck right in the middle of the comic, 2 text pages that are a short story called Big Time that Nathan has written. And it's good.
Yeah.
And, in an ironic way, it's about a bank robbery.
Yes.
And the character that Nathan has written on the page, and we learn this is something that he'd written a couple of years earlier and is now trying to expand into a book. But that character is going to take the money and run.
Yeah.
Not take the money and go return it to the police.
Yes.
And so, he's got both inside of him, I suppose, or maybe he's just imagining the one character. While he is trying to concentrate, and, you can imagine he'd be a little distracted from something where he's got to think and be creative when he has all these ideas flying around in his head now about, wait, what has been happening to me?
Yes.
Am I an alien now? And this alien in his head is kind of taking over his thoughts a little bit, or communicating with him.
Yeah, you start seeing these weird text symbols that you don't really understand, and it's kind of confusing. Like, well, not confusing, but it's just you're wondering, like, what's happening here, and you see him just really fighting with whatever is being sent to his head at this moment.
Mm-hmm. And in modern comics, we don't see thought bubbles very often.
Yeah.
And people will recognize this idea. You got like 3 or 4 little small circles leading away from the side of somebody's head, and instead of a word balloon, it's what's going on in their head. Those thought bubbles are all surrounded in that same kind of blue light.
Yes.
And so there is at least some influence, I guess, on the thinking here, I think, that's coming from, maybe it's not, maybe this is just how they're depicting Nathan thinking, but I'm seeing this as like, okay, my thoughts themselves, even if they're my own, are being intensified or being impacted some way by, by the alien. And before we get too much further with the interaction with the alien side, I have to point this out. On a page here where Nathan is giving himself a break from his writing and just goofing around watching videos on the internet, they show the cat lawyer video.
Yes.
Are you familiar with the cat lawyer?
I am there. It took me a second to zoom in. Yeah, so I am familiar with this video, and it was just interesting because it was like a real event, and they put it in there, and I didn't realize it was 3 years ago that this happened. Because isn't this story in 2021?
2021, yeah.
Yeah, so that was crazy because I feel like I've seen it just recently, but yeah, no, that was funny. And just like since we kind of went back here too, like just that speech bubble where he's kind of breaking through is just the parallels of like being a videographer, like going through all those same different kind of like doubts and questions. Like, is this the right angle? He's talking about like, is this the right sentence structure? Is this the right past tense? Is this the right grammar? And it's like, oh, I get that with like, is this the right composition? Is the color grading right? All these other things. And then that moment where you're just like, I just need to just watch something that's just pure humor, something that has nothing to do with this right now. And so I have caught myself, maybe not a cat lawyer video, just some random TikTok video, but yeah, so this whole page right here was like, yep, all relatable.
So I got to tell you about the cat lawyer video because this made me so happy when I saw that was what was on his screen. You said you feel like it's been more recent. Maybe you saw it back in 21. Maybe you did encounter it later because I think it made kind of a second loop of the internet. But I have to tell you, when the cat lawyer video hit the internet, there was not a lawyer in America who didn't have the cat lawyer video within about 15 minutes. And so for anybody who has not seen this was remember guys, early in the pandemic, we are all still trying to figure out Zoom and how it's going to work. And courts were trying to figure out how they were going to continue administering cases the witness can't sit in the witness box if no one can come in the courthouse. And so you start having a lot of Zoom law cases. So in real life, there's this hearing where you've got a judge and 2 or 3 lawyers who are being called into a hearing, and it's being recorded for court purposes. It's an official hearing. And somehow this one lawyer, and this poor guy, has got a cat filter over his face. So he is talking as a lawyer, except that he appears on the screen as a cat.
Yep.
There's a point where he says, "I'm not a cat, Your Honor. I'm real. It's me." It's just so stinking funny.
In the saddest voice possible, too. Like, he was, like, genuinely sad about it.
It's not me. I'm a cat, Your Honor. And, you know, I don't know how the other lawyers on the video largely kept their composure. I would have been like, you know, you ever see those videos of, like, the news anchors breaking up when
yes.
they have to...
Oh, yep. That would have been me.
I mean, that would have been me.
I'm not good at holding a laugh. If something funny happens in front of me, I'm crying right there, and so I would have completely lost character.
And so thank you for taking a little aside for the cat lawyer video with me. If I got to have a podcast for no other reason than to talk about the cat lawyer video, then this has all been worth it.
Mission accomplished.
Yeah, amen. As these interruptions from the alien or whatever come greater and greater, or maybe even robot, I'm not entirely sure still.
Yes.
Finally, it just comes through so bold that there's just a word that appears across the page, and it just says radiant. So we go back now to our friend Marshall at the video store.
Working his 9 to 5.
Working his 9 to 5, blowing off the customers basically, though, because he is busy thinking about how they're going to market Nathan.
Yes, he has promoted himself to being Nathan's brand manager.
His hype man.
Yes, his hype man.
So he's got this notebook page here, and he's done all these little doodles where he's drawn a picture of Nathan in his costume and a picture of the Saturn thing and all these different names that he's written on the page. And some of them, you know, in different, like, design text. Some of them look a lot like a heavy metal band.
Yep.
One just calls him Circle Guy. But the thing that, you know, we talked about all the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers comparisons. One of them, he's written Mighty Morphin and then scratched it out and written lawsuit.
So good.
Yeah. This book worked on a lot of different levels. Nathan comes into the video store and he starts telling him about this word radiant and trying to figure that out. And they decide that his character is going to be called Radiant Black.
Yep.
And it is funny a little bit. I mean, now his costume is largely black,
yes,
but what sets it off from any of the other Radiant characters is the white trim.
Yes.
And a little bit of blue, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And of course his powers are blue, but Marshall really wants to call it Radiant Black because it just sounds
better.
Yeah, it just sounds cool, you know? And so they settle on Radiant Black, and in the course of their conversation, Marshall creates like a Twitter account or something.
And already tweeted.
Yeah. Radiant Black.
Hey, I'm the second guy who gave back the money. Like, just all within a probably 2-3 minute conversation he made on a social media account and was already tweeting. I was...
It's great. But, you know, it also sort of highlights, though, that Nathan still doesn't really know what he wants to do. Like, he's a little afraid of how the world can be impacted by him using his powers and what that could mean.
Mm-hmm. And I think it did end up being a bigger conversation that you kind of see play out in this back and forth over just what originally was over, you know, his superhero name, social media, like this idea of like, when are you going to take control of your story? Like, when are you going to have ownership of your story? That's something that Marshall kind of hits Nathan with, and I think it was like a fair point at this point, because you see Nathan just, it seemed like he's always struggled with decision making, mm-hmm, which kind of has got him in the predicament he's in, where you have Marshall, who maybe doesn't have the talent that Nathan has, but has always had at least one thing, the ability to make a quick decision. And so you see these personalities just kind of clash.
That's such a great point. The reason Nathan did not succeed out in LA or Hollywood or whatever was not because he was a bad writer. Mm-hmm. It was because he was so paralyzed by his inability to say, yeah, this story works.
Yes.
That it gave him total writing block.
Yes, because the freedom of creativity in any medium, whether that's media, videos, writing, is the freedom of choice. But that's also the greatest weakness too, because it's like there's no limits, there's no structure, there's no boundaries, and that I've seen it firsthand with fellow friends. Like it can mess people up, like having that much freedom and that much to say, and like some people just want to be told what to do. And I think that's kind of where Nathan is at right now, and Marshall's being like, you gotta, like, there's gonna come a point where you have to make this choice for yourself.
Yes. And Marshall is impulsive.
Yes, very impulsive.
And so you can see why things don't always work out for Marshall too. The juxtaposition of those two characters and the fact that they're such good friends really does make that fun to see
Yes.
It's like a yin and a yang, basically.
Yes.
So along the way, while Nathan is kind of trying to, in some ways, avoid, in some ways, figure out what he's going to do with his powers, and realizing that he's not really helping anybody, he looks at his Twitter account and he sees somebody has tagged him. And I keep saying Twitter. Maybe it's a different, it's a made-up service or whatever, but basically Twitter. Someone has tagged him saying, like, boy, I thought this guy was some superhero, and here I am broken down on the side of the road with my car. Mm-hmm. So his next act of valor, where Nathan feels called into duty, is this family's car has broken down. They need to change their tire on the side of the highway, and he's going to come change the tire. And so it's cold out. It's Chicago. You've got mother and son and dad, and dad's got his arm in a cast and a sling, and he's trying to change this tire on the side of the road. And they're all worked up because they want to get to a basketball game. And, they're upset. They're like, if we call AAA, we'll never get there in time. And then all of a sudden, Radiant Black shows up. So this guy is like, wait, I tweeted at you just being goofy that, like, why isn't Radiant Black showing up to change my tire? And, of course, Nathan apparently doesn't have any real ability to change a tire. And, the kid is sort of like, what kind of superhero are you? But Nathan gets an idea, and he loads up this family in the car, and he flies the car with the family inside it off to get them to their basketball game on time. And it's a really fun, this harkens back to Superman again. It's a fun, heroic, flying through the air looking page. And when you think about what he's actually doing, he's just getting some people through traffic, basically. So as we move into chapter 4 of this story, we finally start to get a little bit more of what's going on with whatever this sphere is that has given him these powers and starting to talk to him in his head. We open with, like, it looks like a dream sequence. And you talked about liking Neon, and
yes,
boy,
this was my favorite, definitely my favorite part.
Neon City here. Do you want to talk us through a little bit about, like, how this encounter that we don't know at first really whether it is dream or real life or what?
Yeah, so it seems like he's being confronted by this massive alien-like feature or creature, or like more robotic, I guess is the proper word. And it seems like it's warning him of something. And you see that the weird language that was popping in his head earlier before you saw the radiant. So there's some language barrier that's taking place, but you can also tell just from some beats throughout the story that Nathan was starting to be able to understand more and more what they were trying to tell him. So in a way they were compatible, but it seemed like there was something, they just a weird, quick little dream that was happening, and then we kind of go back to normal times.
Sure, except there is one thing that Nathan understands, that this alien robot thing that has also got a blue visor around his head, sort of like Geordi from Star Trek, which I hadn't thought of until just now. But he says to Nathan, "Welcome to existence."
Yes.
That sounds ominous.
It sounds very ominous.
So quite a bit of the rest of this issue 4 is taken up with Nathan really finally accepting, like, okay, I've got to learn how to use these powers and maximize them, and I need Marshall to come and help me, and we'll work on this together. And Marshall's so excited that they're going to figure out, like, okay, what are the limits of this guy's power? So did you see the first Shazam movie?
Yes.
This reminded me exactly of that.
And it's like, yes, your backyard makeshift, like, training system with just whatever you can find. Nothing, I've been watching X-Men lately. Nothing pretty and classy like the X-Men, like 3D hyper chamber rooms, and he is just literally destroying all of these equipments. Like, he clearly is. I mean, they do not even comprehend how strong his powers are. He's just destroying all of these different models that Marshall have made, and they're just starting to kind of riff around what he can accomplish with his powers and where it even comes from. And it is funny because it's like you can tell that neither of them are, I feel bad because I keep bringing up, these big name superheroes, but yeah, like, I mean, Peter Parker, Spider-Man, like, he's just naturally smart. So it was like he was able to kind of think through these things. But for these two guys, they're like, yeah, something with energy like this. I don't know how this works. And
yep.
Yeah, it just zips around and destroys stuff. Or you could pick up stuff with your mind.
Well, and to go back to Shazam, in that first Shazam movie, when Billy Batson, who is a kid, except for when he's, said Shazam and he's got the power of the wizards or whatever, when he and his friend, who is also a kid, are going to explore these powers, they're like, this is awesome.
Yeah.
They're basically just doing parkour. And, even these guys they're men in their 20s, but they instantly become boys.
Oh, absolutely.
They become boys playing in the woods again, which it was a really fun sequence. But then we switch back into our neon world.
Yep.
And we start to get a little more information about what is going on. It's sort of like computer speak almost that we're getting from this, giant alien robot thing again. And it's talking about how they're trying to sort of integrate the minds, the digital brain and the organic brain, and they're going to integrate them. And that it's not been easy. It's taking some effort, but it seems to be going okay until our giant robot hits Nathan with a question. He tells him that war is near, and that's going to be a war for the Radiant. And it says, he will kill you and your entire planet. To die is to lose everything. Will you do all that is required to save your species? Will you take his life? And once again, to go back to our Nathan and Marshall comparison or contrast, you can see Nathan has this look of fear on his face about that question.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'll say we don't know what he or his is, but I think if you asked me if I was ready to take somebody's life, also, I would have a look of concern on my face.
No, yeah, absolutely. I think, just that the weight of Nathan's just character, his personality, like he has a hard time just choosing what to write about, let alone, to spare or to take somebody's life. Like that's just not a choice that someone as who has now been labeled as a bad decision maker would want to have to make a decision on.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's exactly right. Like, are you prepared to save your species? No.
Yeah.
I think someone else would. Marshall maybe would be good at this. So going back into reality now, and we're seeing Nathan and Marshall walking down the street together, and they're talking about how Marshall would use the powers differently if he had them, and I think Marshall's even taking Nathan to task a little bit for not doing more with them, but they get interrupted by our Radiant Red character appearing again. Yeah,
so Radiant Red comes and just like completely interrupts the conversation, and then you see Nathan quickly, and you see him kind of have a grasp of his powers because he was able to quickly adjust the situation and turn into Radiant Black, and now you have these two going back and forth. You have Marshall, of course. It's just so funny to me because even as a videographer myself, if I was caught in a moment where I saw two superpower beings going against each other, my first thought wouldn't be to record and help my friend go viral. But nonetheless, that is where Marshall brains lead him. So he is trying to film this. And of course, Radiant Red quickly shuts that down by destroying his camera as they just start to destroy a building. Just classic. You see in almost every comic book, just like now a fight in the city and buildings are crumbling. I mean, you just see the strength of these two people, and you even get a little bit of a crack through Radiant Red's mask as Nathan is fighting back. You can kind of start to make out who this person looks like, and you start to see that they have more of a fearful look. They don't look as menacing as maybe they did behind the mask. You can see just from that panel, that little crack of their eye that you can see through the mask, you can see that this is someone who is not fully in the moment or fully happy to be in this moment of confrontation.
That's a great point, because up to this point, we see Nathan out of the mask all the time.
Yes.
We see him out of the mask more than we see him in it, or the helmet, I guess. But Radiant Red, we have only seen fighting,
Yes.
breaking out of a bank,
Stealing, yep.
and all of it in the helmet.
Yes.
And so looking tough at all times. And yeah, once we see this crack, it's almost like a look of terror that we see in the eye of Radiant Red. And, I suppose, too, no matter how maybe Radiant Red was looking tough behind the mask all that time until my mask got punched through.
Yeah.
And suddenly it's like, oh, this is trouble. This person is more powerful than me.
Yes. And then you see in this fight, you kind of are going back and forth between the fight and Nathan going kind of, I guess, in this, his inner conscious, his kind of seeing the dream, and you see him putting his head down. So it's kind of seen, because he is in a moment where he has Radiant Red in a bind. He kind of has this person pinned down, could, take him out, and kind of going back to that choice of are you with, and we don't know for sure if this being is referring to Radiant Red as the life that needs to be taken, but some life needs to be taken, is what they're saying.
And so far, that would be a reasonable assumption based on the information we have as readers up to this point.
Yes.
That's not the case, or at least by the end of Volume 1, that doesn't appear to be the case.
Yes. And so he, in a moment where he could pin down Red, whether that's kill them or, make sure that they don't get back up, Nathan tells them, don't come back, get away. And Red decides to take that moment where, Black is turning away, facing away, to still attack. And so the fight continues, and now the building is crumbling. And Radiant Black, with their ability, people are still inside. We've kind of already established that Nathan is someone who is on the more ethically good side of things. And so his first thought is, I need to save everyone that's here, from Red to the people that are trapped in this building. So he is using pretty much every ounce of his power. You can really see just through the art, how much he is using his powers to keep this building afloat.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of Samson a little bit.
Yes.
Where he spreads his arms out real wide, and of course he's not holding pillars here to knock the building down. He is pushing power out from him to hold the building up while people escape out of it.
Yes. And then you see in this really just sad and painful panel, you see Marshall looking at Nathan and kind of going back to the Spider-Man, the mask, the eyes. You could see just a sad look on his eyes as he comes to realization of what's about to happen. As his powers, whether he let go or his powers gave up, the building just comes collapsing on him. After everybody, including Radiant Red, has gotten out of the building.
Yep. Yeah, and so now we have nothing but a giant pile of rubble, and Marshall running into it, yelling Nathan, and he's pulling debris away, and I guess he's the first one to get in there, and he finds Nathan. And basically, he finds what he believes is a lifeless body, lying there. And meanwhile, we go back, we sort of flash back. Maybe this is inside Nathan's head, I guess.
Yes.
For whatever consciousness that he has left. But the giant robot character is talking, in the neon space, is talking to Nathan again and saying this connection is broken. You're going to die, and that's it. We're done. And we see a panel where Nathan's lifeless body is laying there, and that orb or that black sphere starts coming up out of his chest and floats over to Marshall. And Marshall is looking at it. Marshall has coveted this power that his friend had in a way. And now, all of a sudden, it is basically floating to him the same way it went straight to Nathan before. Now, we go back to, inside the mind, I guess, and this neon space, our giant robot friend is no longer talking to Nathan.
Yes.
It's talking to Marshall.
And I think this is where I really like this story, because it did something that I don't feel like is very common, where in a matter of 2 or 3 pages, the main character of all of this has shifted. I think that's why that you know confusing Nathan and Marshall, because like this whole time we thought this was a story about Nathan, but no, this is a story about Marshall. Like he is radiant. Well, I mean, I'm just going off volume 1, but as we know it from this moment on, he's radiant black, and this is his story, or at least this part of it is his story. It's his origin story, and so that I found that really interesting, because it just, like, I think of like Game of Thrones and a few other shows where you have an expectation of what the main character is going to be, and those things happen, but it's just not common. Like you go see a movie, you usually know who the main character is from start to finish. And so I thought that was really interesting that they did that.
Did you read up anything about Radiant Black going forward before coming here?
I did not.
Okay, I'm glad you didn't, because I'm going to tell you something that I think is going to kind of blow your mind a little bit. We know from the rest of this volume that Nathan is not in fact dead. He's like in a coma or something like that, right? As Radiant Black continues, Nathan and Marshall, I guess Nathan must come out of this coma at some point.
Yes.
Because the stories of Nathan and Marshall continue.
Okay.
So before issue 25 came out, as a promotional activity, you could go online and vote for whether Nathan or Marshall should have the power of the Radiant Black going forward.
Oh, interesting.
Right.
Okay. So this isn't a conclusion. Like, this isn't like this is a Marshall story. This is still their story. Okay.
Sure. But, in 2021, as far as you're concerned, the guy that we came to like as Radiant Black is dead.
Yes.
All but dead.
Yes.
And the guy that at least I was less excited about.
Yes, and I viewed him as a true side character, like just your true side character in every way possible, now getting his hands on the power. And so it's like, okay, I think it highlighted 2 things to me of like how important his role was in this story, and also just how much Nathan actually meant to him, because he did show there's a lot of remorse. You see a lot of pain in his face. You see the seriousness of the moment. Like, we've been dealing with a very impulsive, very radical individual. And in this moment, he very much is someone who is thinking about his friend and thinking about the loss of his friend, and says a lot of things about how much Nathan means to him. And we just didn't, we go back to that bar conversation. We didn't realize that that's how important this was for him.
They might have been great buddies as far as we were concerned, but we see the level of like love, between these 2 characters, the depth of their friendship. Several pages really we see of the guy who had been the wisecracking Marshall, who could never take anything seriously, is kind of doing one of those like foxhole prayer type things where he's yelling like, I'll go to church, save my friend. I'll never do anything bad again. And he's doing it with sincerity. He's watching his friend get taken off in an ambulance, and one of the EMTs who's there tells him, we got a breath out of him, but we have no idea about brain activity and whether, he's going to have any kind of actual life again. And we don't really ever get any further update on Nathan for the rest of this panel.
Yes.
But now this Radiant Black power or alien or whatever has really taken on Marshall as the new host. And Marshall runs off into an alley, kind of like fleeing from the scene of all this rubble. And then the next thing you know, we see Radiant Black flying away out of the city and just as far away as he can get to just escape, basically. And once he finally does and he crashes down, you talked about how you could just see like what this character meant to him.
Yes.
For all he wanted that power, he's yelling out to the sky now like, I don't want it. I don't want this power, because he wants Nathan.
Yeah. And this power probably can save him. Yeah, and it is interesting because it does seem like he is more in tune with it than Nathan was, which was like the running theme of what we were dealing with, was just this idea that Marshall seemed like he had more of a vision and focus of this power than Nathan did.
Yeah. And not long after this, Nathan kind of shifts gears from being broken to being angry. He wants revenge on Radiant Red. Mm-hmm. And we, back in this like neon headspace, the robot is talking to him again, saying, "Are you going to accept these powers? And it's going to mean you have to kill somebody in order to save your race of humanity." And Marshall's answer is like, yes, because what he wants is that power so that he can go get revenge.
Yeah.
Not even less concerned about humanity as a race. He gets that power, and immediately that's what he does. He goes and finds Radiant Red and calls Red out, screaming at Radiant Red about my friend. He's in a coma, and reveals like, "I'm not Nathan, I'm Marshall."
Yep.
And they have another cool powers fight.
Really, just the artwork in this is just so good. Like, I just love the bleeding of black and red, blue, like the blue, black and reds.
Yeah.
Just kind of all combining together as they're just fighting each other. And it gets to a point where they're to a point where they're knocking each other's masks off. And you're starting to get more and more of a visual of Red. And then, you see just the power of Red's. You see Red's power. Like, Red has something, like you kind of mentioned earlier, something with absorbing energy and using that energy for their suit. This person started draining power from Radiant Black and was able to create this like mega suit. Kind of reminds me of like the Hulk Iron Man suit.
Yeah.
And Marshall fights back and unleashes this like really powerful beam of light that leaves Radiant Red maskless, and we now find out that this is a woman, and you can just see on her face that she very much is scared. This isn't someone who, not just your traditional criminal. It looks like she's someone who is very much in a tight spot. And then, she even says that when I just wanted to scare him. I didn't mean, like she's even a loss for words, but you can tell she's pretty much in a pretty tight spot. Yeah,
that's right. And it is kind of a big reveal that this is a woman under the mask, because in some ways I think even the physique of the Radiant Red character had been more masculine looking, but maybe there's a natural, I don't know, we're two men sitting across the table from one another, and Marshall and Nathan are both men, but maybe we just assume that the superhero under the mask is a man.
Yes.
Although, I suppose you were talking about Power Rangers. For decades, Americans have been watching in these full body costumes with helmets on where, other than the physique, you wouldn't know whether somebody was a man or a woman. Yeah.
Usually it was the color, and that was, I guess that's why for me, like, because, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but like the traditional color for like the female Rangers would be yellow and pink.
Yeah.
And so when you think, and Red was oftentimes a male lead, and so it was like it just kind of where your mind goes where you think of these colors. Like, yeah, if this character was in a pink suit with all the same physique, we would have maybe been more open to the idea that this might have been a female, just because of how our minds work. But because of how Radiant Red looked, the physique, all these things, they definitely kind of led you to think that this was a man until you get to that point.
That's right. Well, and you said you don't want to get ahead too far. We're talking literally the next page.
Yep. We see a yellow and pink.
Yes. So this portal opens up where, the Marshall and the Radiant Red are sitting there with their helmets off talking. And this portal opens up, a Radiant Yellow and a Radiant Pink come flying through.
Yep.
Which is wild. They are almost immediately in a state of panic. And the Radiant Yellow is quite a bit older. He's probably in his 60s maybe. And the Radiant Pink, she looks like a teenager.
Yeah.
But they're coming to say, look, you guys are fighting each other over nothing. There is a genuine threat to the whole world. And, still we don't know what this threat is, but, Radiant Yellow is saying he can counteract anything that we can do. And, there's this great fear. And then all of a sudden as well, it's like the characters start to glitch.
Yeah.
And there's this wild white and pinkish purple light that knocks Radiant Yellow and one of the other characters like to the ground, and then sort of a pixelated body starts to form, almost like when you see a hologram taking shape.
Yes, a hologram, yep.
And it takes us to our very last page, and we see this character who is holding these two swords of light and has a hood, and I mean, his face just looks like no features on the face, just a round head in a black, suit mask covering, and says, "Will your planet die as well?" So we've met our villain.
Yep, we've met our villain.
Who is not named. What do you think of our villain?
I mean, he looks amazing. It looks really cool, really neat. I mean, it just everything just happens so fast, and I think that's another thing that's so cool about these kind of stories is that things can just change rapidly. So because you go from Nathan passing, Nathan being in a coma, Marshall getting the powers to a full-on fight. You realize that Radiant Red is a female, and then in like the next panel, you're automatically getting introduced to two new characters, and now you're getting the villain, all within the matter of like 5 or 6, like just a lot dumped all at once. And that goes back to where I was saying, like I left with more questions than answers, because the more like you felt like you were getting somewhere, and now boom, here we are, 4 Radiant heroes, characters, and a villain. Who, like we don't know if he's a human, an alien, because like you said, like there's no facial. This costume doesn't have the same friendly appearance or facial appearance that the Radiant costume has. You don't see eyes. There's like a red slash across your face, like a visor, kind of like a Cyclops.
Mm-hmm. But at an angle.
And at an angle too. So it's not even like it's at where the eyes would be. So it leaves you to really wonder, like, what even is this being? Is this like, what is it? And so a lot of questions, and just the artwork here. I mean, all of this, like, I mean, Into the Spider-Verse is one of my favorite just piece of work with comic books. And this color palette very much follows that.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I see what you're talking about. I hadn't seen that in quite some time, but I see absolutely what you mean. So what is wild is in this volume 1, we've got one more issue of comic.
Yeah.
We will learn nothing else about this bad guy character. Won't learn their name, won't learn where they're from, what their story is, or why they're a threat.
Nope.
So chapter 6 is just called Red, and it is so totally different. We pointed out at the beginning that we had different creators at the very end.
Yep.
And there's no mistaking it. This is a different creator.
The second I mean, this is the only chapter I had to go back and read twice, because I was just so confused for a second, because it looks like you're reading a completely different book just from the very first page.
I'll tell you, if I did not have them in the same bound book already, like if I had gone in and picked up issue 6 of Radiant Black at the comic book shop, I'd wonder if I'd made a mistake.
Yeah.
Or if the printer had made a mistake.
Yeah.
So in very different art style and very different color, like very more like flat kind of color.
Yes.
And I don't mean to say boring, but it's
very
not
soft. Like there's just a lot of strong contrasts and strong color differences, and this one is very, very monotone, very just Thanksgiving feel, very light. And so it's definitely just completely different, and just even the tone of it is different. It seems more friendly than what we at least at the beginning of it.
Right. But I mean, the look even almost feels more like children's animation.
Yes.
Whereas the first 5 issues have felt like this is something they're making for an adult audience.
Yes.
Which is weird, but it is a family having what appears to be a Thanksgiving dinner. They're sitting around the table and they're talking, and right away, and we're still in Darien, Illinois. So I get the sense we're right in the same place. Was Darien the name of the town that they were Marshall and then were? No, it was something different, wasn't
somewhere
it?
Like Lockview, was it?
Yeah, something
like
that.
Right outside of Chicago. So this is a different part, but probably close.
Yeah, I think I probably should look.
And looking at the, I mean, it looks like there's a city view to it. So just kind of going off, like it looked like they might be even closer to the city than maybe where Nathan and Marshall were.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we focus pretty quickly on one of the women who's sitting around the table. Her name is Satomi. She has a fiance named Owen, and they're going to be our featured characters throughout this issue. And we learn that they're engaged. They're planning the wedding. Satomi is talking about how she's, doing all this work, and it's exhausting her to plan the wedding. We learn she's a school teacher. Owen, the fiance, is in some kind of like construction or development business, real estate development. And he's talking about how, they're going to be able to go on this beautiful honeymoon because he's selling some giant condo space. And it's a pretty rosy picture.
Yes.
Doesn't stay rosy.
No, because it seems like, as soon as they leave this family dinner, we kind of almost immediately go back to what we're familiar with. the contrast, you got this red and blue contrast between the two. You kind of hitting at something. And you could just see that not everything is sunny on this with these two couple, and you can kind of feel the tension in the car ride back home.
That's right. And as they're pulling into their driveway, as they get back home to Romeoville, which is the name of the little community where they are, there is a man in a suit who is standing on their doorstep waiting for them to come home. Satomi is going to be asked to go on inside so this guy in the suit can talk to Owen alone. And it's not going to be a pleasant conversation, obviously. When he finally comes back in from finishing talking to this man in the suit who's left, Satomi immediately says, "When did you start again?" And, you can tell there's some kind of pattern. And, that they've been through some kind of cycle. And she recognizes that was the guy from the bank that was standing out there in the driveway in the middle, late in the evening. And this wouldn't be happening if everything was rosy. And we learn pretty quickly that Owen has a gambling problem.
Yes.
And that gambling problem, for not the first time, is taking its toll on this family.
And then we get to a point where we see Satomi. She, gets up in the middle of the night, trying, I guess, maybe catches some air. This seemed like to be an ongoing problem for them, so she's probably just trying to get some space. And then all of a sudden she gets hit by what looks like a meteor, but also the way it impacts the ground is a meteor. It looks like a meteor, but then we see in this smoke that same Saturn-like logo, like that black hole, but now it's red. And we see Satomi reaching out for it, and now in almost the exact same way that we saw Nathan, we see this suit build around Satomi's body in the same way that it built around Nathan. And now she is radiant red.
Right. And so she's having that same kind of whoa moment like we saw with Nathan, where she's figuring out what are these powers, what is going on with them. She lands in some big like pond or something like that and starts absorbing all the water right away into herself. And she's like, what is this? I'm absorbing rocks. I'm absorbing water.
Yeah.
What's going on? And she starts thinking about what she can do with this power. And we see her next sitting in her car. Now it's daytime now. She's not dressed as the Radiant Red anymore. She's just Satomi. She's sitting in the car, and she's sitting outside of their local bank branch. And she goes in, and she's talking to an officer working in the branch about maybe getting some kind of loan against either their business or whatever they can borrow to try and cover the losses that Owen has experienced. And I immediately don't like this loan officer.
No.
I mean, this guy is smiling way too big when he's telling her that she's broke. Part of the revelations that occur here is at some point during the argument that Satomi and Owen had engaged in about this money was trying to figure out how to pay for it. Mm-hmm. And at one point, Satomi offers up, we've got that account, or I've got that account with all the money I've been saving for grad school.
Yes.
We can use that. And Owen says, no, it doesn't matter what happens to this family. We're not touching that money. You are going to get into the best grad school, and you're going to go, and that's your dream. And it makes him seem heroic in the moment.
Yes.
But there's a reason why we weren't going to go touch that account.
Yes, because that account is empty, and she had to find out right there. And you just see the look on her face. Like like I said, the artwork here and just like the facial expressions with and without masks, you can see just because you also see the signature and she can probably recognize that's not her signature.
Right.
And so somebody took that money, and it's only one other person who would be capable of doing that.
That's right. And remember, they're not married yet either.
No.
So, I mean, unless they opened this account jointly, he shouldn't have access to that. And I'm looking at the account on the banker's screen, and it only has one name on it.
And it's signed by her. So he definitely forged the signature. How he did that, I don't know. But he definitely went behind her back and took her, pretty much stole from her in a way.
Yeah. Well, and, had been lying to her the night before, and it's just a total betrayal.
Yes.
And so, Owen thinks that he's covered this up pretty well. He comes home from work that evening to find a very, very angry Satomi there in the house. She freaks out on him, and she yells at him, and, she says, I'm done with this. I can't do this anymore. And then at some point, her face starts, glowing red. She's so mad. Mm-hmm. And she punches the wall, and, the wall is just, rock shattering, basically. Yes. So we can see that she's, even not meaning to, I don't think, here, accessing those powers. And, it's heartbreak. It's a really hard moment. And she starts storming out the door, and he's yelling to her, Satomi, wait. He's crying now, and he's standing in this door, and he's saying, please forgive me. And she goes back in, and they hug. At that moment, I'm kind of like, oh, don't do this. Yeah. Don't go back to this guy.
Yeah, because as you could see in that conversation that he definitely he knows all the right things to say. This is your very common, typical gaslight, hopeless romantic situation where
he's a manipulator. He's
very much, because even before he tried to get her to, you don't understand the situation. It's like, well, you took my money that I saved up. Of course I don't understand the situation. This is wrong.
You know what? You're right. I breezed right past this here, but when Satomi is confronting Owen about this betrayal, Owen tries to turn it on her and say, wait, you went to the bank without telling me?
Yes.
You ruined everything because you're just some silly teacher. Downplays even her profession.
Her profession, yep.
You've never dealt with anything more serious than a kid who's acting unruly in class. And now I'm the important businessman. I'm going to be embarrassed because you did this. And that's when Satomi really blows up at him. And good that she does. But, man, he knows how to pull the right heartstrings and bring her back. And so next we see Satomi. She's sitting in a car. She's by herself, and she looks angry, or at least that's how I read it. But it may be that she's looking determined.
Yes, probably a little bit of both at this point.
Sure.
So you see, it's once again, no words. You just see panels of her next actions. It's her going to what looks like to be a car garage, or just found a car, and then we see that same thing that we saw earlier where she's taking a car engine. So it seemed like there might be a great source of power in those engines that she finds valuable for her suit. And next thing you know, we see her walking into that MK bank branch, and then don't even get to see how she goes about it. All we see in what I think is just a very hardcore image is her coming back home. You see her fiance just looking pitiful. And he asks her, when she comes in, what did you do? And she just responds with, I handled it. And you just see money. You see her with duffel bags of money and money just flying everywhere. And it seems like that's where we end.
It's an awesome panel because she is standing there in an open doorway with those two bags. And I love how this happens in movies. Where you remember this in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, when babyface Nelson robs a bank.
Yes.
And he's driving away and the money's all
just
flying
out.
Yeah.
Yes.
So she's standing in the doorway. I don't know if there was a tornado in this doorway.
We don't have zippers on these duffel bags. They just stay open.
But there's cash flying everywhere, and it's so cold on her face.
And she doesn't have the suit on either, and that's what makes this even. I feel like even colder is she's standing there herself and with this money in her hand, and yeah. So it's interesting because now you have. I found her story more. As much as I could relate to Nathan's story, her story just had more. It was more compelling because it was all in one chapter too. It was in one chapter they gravitated me towards this character who's in a abusive relationship, who's a teacher, who is just trying to make ends meet. And it's just really interesting that when presented with the same powers that Nathan was presented with, she chose this different path.
Well, and I also like that we've got a whole new angle to look at Satomi.
Yes.
Because we're introduced to Satomi as a villain.
Yes.
As a bank robber, as someone who's attacking this Nathan character that we've come to like.
Yes.
We don't know anything about the person behind the mask. We don't even know it's a woman. Mm-hmm. And now Satomi has become more sympathetic.
Yes.
And we realize, she robbed a bank and then attacked a bunch of people and then destroyed half a city block.
Yes.
But her heart was in the right place.
Mm-hmm. and one thing that I do find interesting, and that this might be opening a can of worms here, or I might be getting ahead of myself, is the fact too that and it took me a second to realize, because I figured when I was reading this chapter that this was who Red was, but she is significantly younger in this story than when we saw her at the end of issue 5.
Oh,
to the point where Aless is a different. Is it not the same person?
Well, no. I don't have any reason to think that. I just thought it was because you have a different artist that she looks younger.
That might play into it as well. She just looks.
You're right. The way she's drawn in issue 5, she looks
more mature.
That's right.
Is a more mature look, more of an adult look, where she looks like someone that's in her mid-20s.
That's right.
In the last issue that we read, but in that one, it looked like a more of a full-grown adult.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's art or if these two got their powers at the same time. I guess that's something I would probably learn more if I dive into it more.
Yeah, I had an assumption that this was not a long-running crime streak that she was on, and so maybe this was all relatively about the same time, but I suppose I don't know. And, what's crazy is, there are all these other volumes and other series in the Massive Verse that have come. I can't tell you anything about them at all.
So this is all you've read as well?
Exactly.
Okay.
I've read nothing more, and I will now make it a priority to read more.
Same. Yeah, same. No, I definitely want to catch up and know more about where the story goes from here.
Mm-hmm. Travelle, this is great.
Yeah.
In the episodes that you produced and in getting the podcast set up and figured out, I was so thankful that we got to hang out as much as we did.
Yeah, same.
And it's so good to have you back over doing this again. Well, then, can we plan on doing more of this?
Hey, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, whether it's this or Power Rangers or something else altogether,
I'll be ready.
And I'm going to have you turn me on to an anime for one of these, or a manga for one of these.
Yes, let's do it. Oh,
cool.
Absolutely. I got quite a few I could toss your way.
Well, we'll mark it down. Hey, thanks so much, and everybody, thank you so much for listening. If you're still with us, I hope so. Please hit us up on Instagram at Graphic Novel Apostle or via Gmail at graphicnovelapostle@gmail.com. Hope to hear from you soon. Keep reading those comics.